Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Templar Detective and the Sergeant's Secret by J. Robert Kennedy. Narrated by Philip Battley. Master, go on, and I will follow thee to the last gasp, with truth and loyalty. As You Like It, Act 2, Scene 3. William Shakespeare. Nothing is more noble, nothing more venerable than loyalty. Cicero. Preface. In medieval France, the king used agents known as baillis or bailiffs to administer much of his realm, and, as a result, these men wielded much power over the subjects they were responsible for, including collecting taxes, calling men to service, and administering the laws of the land. These men were appointed by the king, were paid by the crown, and their entire livelihoods were dependent upon their continued employment. Even more dependent were those they hired to assist them, known as bailiffs' delegates, who wielded similar powers, though on a much smaller geographic scale. And should this power be wielded in such a way that the population they were responsible for were to take offence, the livelihood of the bailiff's delegate could be threatened. Unless, of course, fear ruled the hearts of those who would have cause to complain. 1. Kingdom of France, A.D. 1297. Simon Chastain roared in agony as his entire body jerked off the table, his arms and legs stretched to their limits by ropes attached to ratchets that left his naked body racked with pain as his torturer cranked the wheel yet another turn. It was unlike anything he could have imagined, even at the hands of the Saracens. But these weren't Saracens. These were fellow Frenchmen. And they weren't his brothers. He was a Templar sergeant and had fought in the Holy Land for the better part of 2 decades, but recent events had changed all that. With the death of his master's sister, he and 2 trusted squires had followed Sir Marcus de Rancourt back to his family's home, and the decision had been made to stay and raise the orphaned children. It had been a decision he initially supported. Then doubts had set in. Doubts that had led him here, in some unknown prison, tortured daily for weeks on end. The pain he could endure, as it would end eventually, though for now they were keeping him alive for some reason. It was the solitude between these torturous sessions that would be the death of him. His faith had prepared him for what was eventually to come, and he didn't fear it. In fact, he would welcome it after these past weeks, and if it weren't for his master and friend, he would have given up long ago. But he couldn't let go. Not yet. For he had to survive somehow, so his master, his friend, Sir Marcus, would know he hadn't betrayed him. He had to make certain his master knew he had done everything he could to return to his side, his decision made. He somehow had to get home to a farm only weeks ago he had cursed. A farm that held everything he loved in the world, and worse, everything that loved him. 2. De Rancourt residence, Crécy-la-Chapelle, Kingdom of France, 1 month earlier. It's makeshift, but it will have to do. Sir Marcus Rancourt let his eyes wander around the nearly finished barracks on the farm he now called home. With the death of his sister several months ago, he and his trusted men, Sergeant Simon Chastain and Squires David and Jeremy, had all agreed to remain, giving up the life of brotherhood in the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, the Knights Templar. Though they hadn't truly given it up. They had been granted special dispensation to remain members of the order, while remaining on the farm. It was a difficult life, but life as a Templar was also difficult, though in different ways, in ways they all knew and loved. Farm life was different, and he wasn't yet convinced he could ever love it. Tanya, the farm's mastiff, charged into the barracks, barking happily as the children he was now responsible for chased her, giggling, as happy as he had ever seen them. Jacques and Angeline, his late sister's children, were in the lead, their cheeks red, their hair filled with snowflakes, and Pierre, an orphan they had taken in after his parents' murder, followed, struggling for breath, though clearly content. They disappeared in short order. "We need a door." The others chuckled at Simon's observation as they all sat around the stone fireplace that, try as it might, could only take some of the chill out of the winter air, the structure still far too draughty. Marcus regarded his friend. "Tomorrow we'll put one on. The extension to the house is finished, and Lady Joanne is now settled with her chambermaid. We can now return our attention to our own accommodations." David, the eldest of the two squires, eyed him. "Did you say our?" Marcus smiled. "Yes, I did. Now that we have 2 women living with us, the children don't need me in the house, and I fear what the townsfolk might think should I be staying under the same roof as them." Simon grunted. "I wouldn't dare say anything if I have anything to say about it." Marcus laughed, slapping his friend on the back. "My honour is always secure with you around." He stared through the open door and down at the house left him by his sister and brother-in-law Henri. Henri was the connection he had with Lady Joanne de Rohan, a woman who had lost everything after accusations of adultery just weeks ago. Forced from her home, he had offered her a place to stay, an offer she had happily accepted. He had to admit it was a relief. Though he was anything but comfortable around women, he was even less so around children. He knew nothing about either. But Lady Joanne had taken to the children immediately, as had her trusted chambermaid Béatrice, and their presence had mercifully reduced the attentions of the young Isabelle Leblanc, a friend of his late sister's, who had, along with her mother, taken care of the children while they awaited his return from the Holy Land. And Isabelle was a constant source of delight for his men, who teased him mercilessly about her apparent desire to take him for a husband. She was a beautiful woman. Even he wasn't blind to that. But he was a warrior monk, sworn to poverty and celibacy, and as he remained a Templar, he was still bound by those vows. Lady Joanne's voice called out, announcing dinner, and the children bolted toward the house. Somebody screamed. They all leapt to their feet, rushing out the door, to see Pierre tumbling down the slope, then rolling to his knees, giggling as he brushed the snow off himself, Jacques standing with his fists on his hips, apparently having pushed him. "What did I tell you about that?" cried Joanne, wagging a finger. "Someone is going to get hurt one of these days if you're not careful." "Or killed." Marcus glanced at Simon, his friend's face clouded over, his eyes glistening, his gaze unfocused, as if he was staring back at some distant memory. "Are you all right?" Simon sighed, then nodded. "Just remembering something." "What?" "Nothing I care to talk about." Simon stabbed a finger toward the children. "They just don't listen. How many times has she told Jack to stop shoving Pierre?" David stared after the children as they raced inside the house. "I think he's jealous. He's just trying to establish his dominance over Pierre, so that he knows his place." David shoved Jeremy, tripping him with a strategically placed foot. "Like Jeremy knows I'm his better." Jeremy stared up at him. "I hear there's a witch in the woods. Maybe I'll seek her out in the morning and make sure she puts a curse on you." David glanced around, his hands palms up, and shrugged. "What more can she do to me?" Marcus frowned, David noticing, his jaw dropping at the realization of what he had said. "I'm sorry, sir, I didn't mean it like that. I was just joking around." Marcus nodded, but knew his squire was telling him only half the truth. None of them were truly happy. This was not the life they were used to. They were all Templars of varying ranks, all devoted to the Brotherhood, and now, thanks to his decision and their undying loyalty to him, he had condemned them all to a life toiling on a farm, raising children, and protecting the growing brood that now called the humble property home. David's head dropped. "I'll go get us our dinner." Jeremy scrambled after him, clearly not wanting to stick around for whatever might be said next. Marcus turned back toward the barracks and glanced over his shoulder at Simon, following a few paces behind. "And what do you think?" Simon's eyebrows rose slightly. "Of what?" "Of this new life." I've told you that my place is at your side." "And if it weren't?" Simon looked away, as if ashamed of what he might say. "Out with it, my friend. If I can't trust you to tell me the truth, then whom can I?" Simon sighed as they stepped through the open doorway. "I can't say that I'd choose this life." "What would you choose?" Simon sat on the edge of his bed, the private rooms Marcus had promised them all yet to be completed, and until each had their own room they had all agreed to continue to share. "I can feel it in my bones that I'm no longer the warrior I once was. The journey back to the Holy Land would be long and arduous, and I'd be just that much older by the time I got back there." "So you would stay in France?" Simon nodded. "Now that I'm here, yes. If we had never left, I'd have been content to die on the sands our Lord once roamed." Marcus shivered against the cold. "I never thought I'd miss the heat, but days like today make me yearn for the desert sun." Simon grunted. "This will be my first winter in France since I was a boy." "You grew up not far from here, didn't you?" Simon stared out the door. "A few days' ride, on the other side of Paris." "Is your family still there?" "No idea." Marcus stared at his friend. In all the years he had known Simon, the man had barely mentioned his home. All Marcus knew was that he apparently had a brother, and that he hadn't seen nor spoken to any of his family since he left as a boy. In fact, Marcus didn't even know why he had left. "Can I ask you something?" Simon regarded him, his eyes suggesting he wanted to say no, as if he knew what Marcus was about to ask. "Of course." "Why did you leave?" Simon looked away, but not before a hint of shame revealed itself. "It's not something I want to talk about." "I'll respect your privacy, my friend. But whatever the reason, it clearly bothers you." Marcus steeled himself for what was to come next, for he feared what the response might be. "And clearly life here has you troubled." He leaned forward, placing a hand on his friend's shoulder. "You have been my brother for longer than I can remember. There is no one that I trust more than you, or love more than you. And it pains me to see you unhappy." Simon turned back toward him, staring him in the eyes. "You shame me with your words." Marcus's chest ached at the pain in his friend's voice. He leaned back, removing his hand. "Our work here is done for the season. All that is left is to finish the barracks and tend the animals. It is work that can be done without you. I propose you go visit your family, and settle whatever business you have with them from so long ago." Simon's mouth opened to respond, a response that Marcus was certain would be a rejection of his suggestion. He held up a finger, cutting Simon off. "Go to your family, settle your business with them, and then make your decision as to what you want to do with your life. Whether that is to return to the Holy Land to serve the Order, leave the farm to serve the Order in some other capacity, remain with your family, or to return here, I will support your decision, no matter what." He leaned forward once again, lowering his voice. "My friend, I release you from any obligations you might have toward me. Go, seek out your family. Settle any past grievances, then, with a clear conscience, decide for once in your life what is best for Simon, rather than what is best for those around you." Simon's shoulders slumped, and as his friend drew in several deep, slow breaths, it was clear he was struggling to maintain control. Marcus desperately wanted to ask him once again what was bothering him, but held off, knowing his friend needed space right now to maintain his dignity. Something had happened when Simon was a child. What it was, he wasn't sure, but it had happened when he was young, perhaps not even 10 years of age. All Marcus knew was that Simon had left home and met up with a group of Templars heading for the Holy Land. They had taken him in, assuming he was orphaned, and he had trained to become a squire, then eventually a sergeant. Precious little information to go on. But recently there were hints of something more. The horseplay between his nephew Jacques and the orphan Pierre seemed to trouble Simon, especially when Jacques, larger than the slight Pierre, dominated him. Simon never said anything, but Marcus knew his friend well enough to know when he was restraining himself. Fortunately, Lady Joanne's introduction into their growing family provided a firm voice to admonish the young Jacques, and Simon's unconscious head-bobbing betrayed his feelings on the matter. "Did something happen when you were young? Something regarding children bullying each other?" David and Jeremy entered the room carrying a large pot of stew and 2 loaves of bread. They hooked the pot over the fire, then grabbed Marcus's and Simon's bowls sitting on a shelf near the hearth. David handed his master a full steaming bowl of what smelled like something delicious. Marcus took it, then the chunk of bread held out for him. "Thank you." David curtsied in a manner any lady would be proud of, as Jeremy held out Simon's meal, the old warrior ignoring him. "Sergeant?" Nothing. Jeremy kicked Simon in the shin, finally getting his attention. "Where were you?" Simon grunted, taking the food before glancing at Marcus sheepishly. "The other side of Paris, I believe." Marcus nodded in understanding. His friend had made his decision. He would be leaving them. Now the question was whether he would ever return. 3. Approaching Le Chesnay, Kingdom of France, 3 days after leaving the farm. Simon Chastain stared at the barren, snow-covered landscape surrounding him. France could be a desolate place when it wanted to be, though nothing compared to the Holy Land. The trees along the way, their leaves long having given up their hold, could be mistaken for the drought-stricken branches with which he was so familiar. Except for the white. It was everywhere, the only break in the pine trees of the forest and the mud of the well-travelled road upon which he now found himself. And none of it looked even remotely familiar. As a boy, he had never left his village, not once. He remembered his family was poor, very poor, but never hungry. His father worked the farm hard, sacrificing a portion of his crops to pay the rent, the rest used to feed the family or trade for what was needed. And in the winter, when the farm was frozen over, he remembered his father working odd jobs, a very handy carpenter. And his mother. His chest ached at the thought of her. All he could remember of her was the smile and the wonderful smells that would waft from the kitchen. Her baked goods were in high demand, he recalled, not only among his friends, but the townsfolk as well, her wares helping supply several taverns in the area, weary travellers blessed with her homemade goods. Though perhaps the life he remembered wasn't as idyllic as he now imagined. As with most memories, only the best and worst were usually retained over time. The mundane was forgotten, the day-to-day misery shoved into the far recesses of the mind. Only the triumphs and tragedies were retained from those times. He remembered skinning his knees, spraining an ankle, cracking his head on a rock. And the death of one young boy. And what Simon's father had thought of his own son. 4. Le Chesnay, Kingdom of France, A.D. 1266, 31 years earlier. "Hey, what did I tell you? Don't touch the shirt!" Simon shook his head at Gilles Laurent. The shirt was impressive, unlike any he had ever before seen, and it definitely shouldn't be worn when horsing around. It was apparently from Paris, a city he had only heard of and desperately wanted to see. He hoped to one day. He dreamed of exploring its streets as a young man, when he had escaped the clutches of his parents, and experiencing the life he had heard described by those travelling through their small town. But there was plenty of time for that. Plenty of time. After all, he had just turned 10, and according to his older brother, until he had hair on his penis, he wasn't a real man. He wasn't so sure about that. He knew he wasn't a man. But that wasn't the problem. But hair on his penis? The very idea sounded like nonsense. He didn't have a hair anywhere except on his head. Why would God choose to grow it on one's penis as well? His brother was always playing pranks on him, so he believed only about half of what he told him. Or rather, he should. He was always falling for his brother's lies. He sighed. "Can I ask you guys something?" Gilles stopped, as did Christian Samuel, whose finger was in mid-air, ready to touch the forbidden shirt ever so gently, and Roland Villeneuve, who was snickering uncontrollably. Gilles looked at him. "What?" "Well, my brother says that when we get older, we're going to get hair on our penises." Christian and Roland's eyes bulged in shock, but Gilles nodded. "Well, it's true." Simon's eyes shot wide as well. "It is?" "Yes, but not on it, around it. In fact, I've got hair already." Everyone gathered around Gilles. "Show us." "I'm not showing you." "Come on," pleaded Simon. "I want to see." "Yes, show us," urged the others. Gilles, a couple of years older than the rest, shrugged. "Fine, but if you tell anyone, I'll kill you." And he dropped his pants. All three boys leaned closer, their heads mere inches from Gilles' private parts. Simon twisted his head and looked up at Gilles. "Where's the hair?" Gilles glared at him. "What are you talking about? It's right here." He reached down and pulled at something to the side of his member. Simon snickered. "One hair?" Gilles yanked his pants up, blushing. "Yes, well, it's one more than you've apparently got." Christian pointed. "Gilles got one hair, Gilles got one hair." Gilles took a swing at Christian, but the younger brother managed to dodge it, continuing his taunts, Gilles' face growing redder by the moment. It was turning into rage. And that was never something you wanted. Not with Gilles. Simon motioned for Roland to back off, and was about to call an end to the taunts, when Gilles lashed out, shoving Christian hard with two hands to the chest. Christian reached out as he fell backward, his right hand gripping the shirt-sleeve of Gilles' fine imported silk shirt. The tearing of the fabric was shocking, and jaws dropped all around. As Christian continued to fall backward, he slammed into the ground, the impact sounding oddly hollow. Then he disappeared with a scream. They all rushed to the side of the hole now revealed, Simon reaching it first and peering over the edge. "Christian! Are you all right?" But there was no response. Simon looked at the others. "Can you see him?" Gilles and Roland both shook their heads. Simon leaned in farther, squinting into the darkness that stretched out below them, the rock-lined walls revealing what this hole once was. A well. An abandoned well, apparently, and judging by how the wood covering it had snapped so easily, abandoned long ago. "Christian!" The only response was the echo of his own voice. Roland pointed. "Wait! I see him!" Simon peered into the darkness and noticed his eyes were slowly adjusting. Then he gasped. Christian was lying in a heap at the bottom of the well, his neck twisted, his tongue hanging out, his eyes wide and still. He was dead. He had to be. Simon had seen enough death on the farm to recognize the look, and it terrified him. He pushed to his feet. "We've got to get help!" He turned to leave when Gilles grabbed him by the arm. "No!" Simon jerked his arm free. "What do you mean, no?" "You fool! He's dead! If we tell anyone, we'll get in trouble!" Simon stared at him, mouth agape, then snapped his jaw shut. "You mean you'll get in trouble? We didn't push him! You did!" Gilles stepped closer. "What are you saying?" Simon recognized the tone of the older boy. It was one he had heard before from him, and it usually ended in a good beating, a beating that would always go unpunished, as Gilles' father was the bailiff's delegate for the area. He was the law, and Mr. Laurent never punished his own son, and never doubted his own son's word. But surely, this time, he would have to punish him. After all, Christian was dead, by Gilles' hand. Gilles gave Simon a shove. "I asked you a question. What are you saying?" Simon stepped backward. "Me and Roland did nothing wrong. You're the one who pushed him, not us." Gilles' cheeks and ears went red, and his nostrils flared. He advanced, and Simon prepared for the beating of a lifetime. Then Gilles stopped, a smile creeping up from the corners of his mouth. "You did it." Simon's eyes widened, confused.
What? That's what I'm going to tell them. You did it.
Simon's eyes widened further, exchanging a horrified glance with Roland.
But I didn't touch him.
I don't care. Gilles' smug expression was terrifying, for Simon knew why it was there. Gilles was always believed by his father, and his father was the only law the town had. No one would believe the poor son of a poorer farmer.
They'll never believe you.
Gilles laughed, tossing his head back.
Who do you think they're going to believe? Me, the son of the bailiff's delegate, or you, the pathetic son of an even more pathetic farmer who can barely feed and clothe his own family?
A rage formed in the pit of Simon's stomach at the insults levied against his father. He pushed it down, as this wasn't the time to defend his family's honour. There were more pressing matters at hand. He directed a shaky finger at Roland.
Roland knows what happened. It'll be 2 against 1.
Gilles sneered, walking toward a now cowering Roland.
Roland knows that I'll kill him if he doesn't say exactly what I want him to say.
He grabbed Roland by the back of the neck, dragging him toward the open well.
Do you want to join him? No. Then who pushed Christian? Simon did.
Gilles let go of Roland's neck, a smile of pure evil spreading.
There, you see? 2 against 1.
Simon stepped slowly backward, his head shaking uncontrollably.
You'll never get away with this. It's not fair.
Gilles grunted.
Like my father always says, who said life was supposed to be fair?
One side of his nose curled up.
They're going to hang you when they find out.
He started to laugh, pointing his finger at Simon.
You're going to be swinging from a tree before the sun sets.
Simon stared at Gilles in horror, then at Roland, nervously joining in on Gilles' laughter. Settling the matter. Simon turned and sprinted away from the well, heading for the trees, checking over his shoulder repeatedly for any signs of pursuit, but there were none. He hid in the tree line, turning back to watch Gilles and Roland cover up the abandoned well with what remained of the broken wood, then several tree branches. Then, as the 2 boys ran toward the town, Simon realized he had made a grave mistake. He should have run toward home rather than away from it, for getting the truth out first would be his only hope.
They are going to hang me.
His stomach flipped, and he bent over as he emptied his stomach contents onto the forest floor. He spat, wiping his mouth on the back of his sleeve, then raced after the others. It didn't take long to reach the small town they all called home. He had always been happy here, despite his dreams of Paris, and Sundays, like today, were when he was happiest. After church, the entire town would gather. Then, later, he would return to the family home, and, with no one working, they would all sit around the fire and listen to stories expertly told by his father until they were all falling asleep in each other's arms. It was a great life. A life that today was working against him. For everyone but the children were still in the church, and that was where Gilles and Roland were heading. There would be no way to head them off, or to get to his own parents first, to tell them his side of the story. Gilles burst through the doors, and Simon could hear, even from this distance, the words that would change his life forever.
Simon killed Christian!
What? Cried someone, a woman, but Simon couldn't be sure who. He reached the church, but instead of going inside, ran around to the back, out of sight of the road and anyone who might come outside searching for him. He pressed his eye against a gap between the boards, staring at those inside as they gathered around the new arrivals. Gilles' parents pushed through the crowd, his father an imposing figure that helped in his job as bailiff's delegate.
What's going on here?
Christian's parents followed in Mr. Laurent's wake.
What's happened to Christian?
Asked the boy's mother.
There was a fight,
explained Gilles, quickly spilling out the lie he had obviously rehearsed on his way here.
Simon pushed him and he fell into...
Gilles' mother cried out.
What happened to your shirt?
Mr. Laurent stared at his wife.
I hardly think his shirt matters at a time like this.
The look she gave him made it clear she disagreed, but Simon wasn't paying that any mind. There was a hole in Gilles' story, a hole Simon couldn't possibly see how the liar could explain. And Gilles knew it, his eyes bulging as he was probably remembering for the first time that Christian had torn the shirt when he fell.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?